Can you guys hear me? If you can hear me, say something in the chat, like yes. Aladdin, excellent. Introduce yourself in the chat. Can you say the city where you're connecting from?
I think that's probably a good point to get started. Oh, I thought you were going to go for the headband then, mate. I mean, that might have been a bit too much, too sporty. Brilliant to have this webinar today. I'm looking forward to learning quite a bit. And the webinar is about storytelling and data visualization. And luckily, at various events last year, I managed to bump into Jose and have some fun, and managed to get him to come and do a webinar about one of his many topics, one that he's written a book on. So this is really good. We're all expected to be we're all consuming a lot of data visualization at the moment with the various bits of data, the flattening the curve, if you're in the UK, the fabulous faked we've met 100,000 targets by the end of the month. So we all need to understand, and actually within our business, we focus on processes, and one of the things that's a unique selling point of the software we use is the fact that you're actually getting a lot of data out about your costs and the benefits. So luckily, as I say, bumped into Jose last year at Map Camp with Simon Wardley, and Jose then attended the Engage Process user group the next day in London. So that was quite lucky. So Andy Sanford, founder and director of improvement of We Are Lean and Agile, and I'll hand over to Jose to introduce himself because he'll do it a lot better than I do.
Thank you, Andy, for these kind words. So yes, Andy and I met last year in MapCamp, which is a data visualization and strategy thinking conference, and it's not an academic conference. It's a new conference. And it was amazing. And a few months later, I finished my book, which I've been working on for approximately 1 year, and that you can buy on Amazon, right? And today we have some quizzes. And so the person who answers all the quizzes correctly will get a free copy of the book. Yes, excellent. So let's go with it.
Brilliant, mate. Okay. So yeah, we're going to use various things within the tools today. So if you haven't attended one of our webinars before, we will be using the polls, the chat that most of you have already seen there. Please do use the Q&A as well. So the way Q&A differs from the chat is that your questions will go in there, we'll publish them, and whichever get the most votes, then Jose will pick up towards the end. So it's a way of us sort of seeing what are the most popular questions. And obviously we're also using the presentation. In the handouts tab within your window, you can also access this slide deck. So please don't get distracted and go into that, but you can go and download that as you see fit. And just one more thing from me before I actually let Jose do the good stuff, really. So it's great to have him here. He's already stolen the thunder. We do have a quiz. If you get the questions right, then you will get a copy. All of the questions, if you get them right, you will get a copy. There is a link here to Amazon to get the book if anyone's interested. And it's a very good book. I've got a copy, so do have a look. And maybe after this webinar, it will whet your appetite for the more details that are there in the book. So I'm going to stop now because we've got a fantastic expert. So let's let Jose take over.
Thank you, Andy. Also, there is a Spanish version of the book, which is actually selling more copies than the English version. So if you're a Spanish speaker, I totally recommend that version because it's in really good Spanish. Awesome. So let's see. I'm going to click the next slide. So yes, storytelling and data visualization. And so let me ask you a question. How many of you have heard about death by PowerPoint? You can say something in the chat if you want.
Yeah, put some in the chat if you have. I have. I'm just going to type that in now.
And how many of you have heard about death by Excel? And how many of you have heard about death by Tableau? Right. So before we start, I want to play a little game with you. This guy here is Edward Deming, the famous management guru. And he said this thing you see written here. Can you guess what is the missing keyword in what he said? You can type it in the chat.
And you did also say first one gets a copy of the book.
Carlos Barreto, you got a free copy of the book.
Fast
Right.
finger first.
So Edward said that if you want to convince people, you need data. The problem is that data usually looks like this and leaves people feeling like this, right? But if you want to convince them, you need to make them feel like this. And the problem is that there is a lot of bad charts out there. If you go to Google and you type in bad chart, you will see first search result, this one. 100 most active tweeters, an example of the wrong chart for the job. You may also see this one. The X is number of countries and the Y is number of data scientists per country. An example of information overload. And you may also find these kind of charts. My favorite, the superfluous chart. So I am an academic, right? And as a professor, I went on a quest to find out why is it that we have so many bad charts. And it took me 5 minutes to find the culprit. This is him. He is a school dropout, never took a design course in his life, yet 90% of the charts you will see before you die are made with his software. But he's not the only one at fault. The educational system, us, we also have some responsibility. Correct, Maurice, it's Bill Gates. Because if you want to teach data visualization, well, we need the data science skills, right? And you also need a bit of design skills. The problem is that the data scientist looks like this, and designers usually look like this, and they usually don't go to the same schools, right? And the schools that like to teach design don't like to teach data science, and vice versa. And there are very, very few schools where they like to teach both in the same place. Here's two examples. One of them is MIT Media Lab, and the other one is Aalto University in Helsinki. Right. So to fix this epidemic of bad charts, I decided to give you 6 rules of how to visualize data. Are you ready? So rule number 1, when you visualize a chart, tell me a story. Because if you have something to say and you say it in words, some people will remember it. If you make a chart out of it, more people will remember it. But if you tell me a story, even more people will remember it. Number 2, know the difference between data and information. So, and here is the first quiz of the session. Here you have 4 keywords. Can you order them in a logical way?
Don't forget, there's a book on the line here for all of the answers correct.
Okay, I'm going to submit my own answer.
Yeah.
I hope it's correct.
So here we've got some answers coming through. That's good. We've still got maybe half the people to go. So,
so how would you order these keywords in a logical way? Any logical way?
I think we're just about there. Oh, one just snuck in. Another one. Oh, they're still dribbling in.
All right. Exciting.
Okay, we got 33. So let's knock on, mate.
Good.
34.
So I'm going to show you the answer. And the answer is, one of the possible answers is this one: data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. And when I ask this to my students, most of my students come up with this arrangement. But how do we arrange this and why? Which criteria do we use? So can you tell me, and this is quiz number 2, what are the main differences, or which attributes can you use to differentiate, to discriminate data from wisdom and knowledge? Which attributes do you think discriminate the best these 2 keywords, data, wisdom?
Well, here they come.
It's a nice weather today in Stockholm. We have like 8 degrees.
Really, it's tipping it down in Torquay. It's horrible.
Oh yeah? What temperature do you have?
Don't know, probably similar. Maybe a bit more. Maybe about 12, 13.
It's so funny because Swedish people say this is summer, and I say, what are you talking about? I'm from Barcelona.
Oh dear. The way you said
right.
I'm from Barcelona, that did remind me of Fawlty Towers.
Yeah, by the way, in the Spanish version of Fawlty Towers, Manuel is not from Barcelona. We changed it to he's from Seville.
Okay. That's good to know.
It was too much for us to take in. Yeah.
We'll close the poll now.
Right. So data is many.
What was the correct answer, mate?
So it's quantity and value, right? So data is many and it's abundant, and wisdom is usually valuable and scarce. And this arrow we call the arrow of value. If you can master this arrow in your job, you will be very popular with your bosses. And here comes the next rule. Know how to create knowledge from data. How do we do that? There is this thinking framework called the Data Information Knowledge Wisdom Pyramid, and it explains the relationship between the information classes that we have. At the bottom, we have data, right? How do you transform data into information? Well, one usual way is to summarize data, usually with a histogram, for example, right? Next, you have how to transform information into knowledge. A typical way to transform info into knowledge is by connecting the information that you have to existing bodies of knowledge. That's what will make your information useful to you and other people. If you look at science, for example, and you look at Albert Einstein's papers, that's how Albert Einstein got his Nobel Prize. He didn't create data or knowledge out of nowhere. What he did was to connect data from other researchers to existing thinking frameworks that existed from long ago. And that's why he got the Nobel Prize. It's super interesting. And what is wisdom? Well, one guy once told me, Jose, if you want to be a leader, it's not only what you say, it's when you say it. Wisdom is knowing when to apply the knowledge. And here you have two thinking modes. Similar to thinking fast and slow, you need exploratory thinking mode, what in design thinking we call divergent thinking, to explore connectivity. And you also need a convergent thinking mode. Number 4, if you make a chart and no one, not even your mom, likes it on Facebook, did it really happen? We don't know, right? So how can we make the chart more memorable, right? One way is to use pop culture, like personas. Number 5, use narratives. What is a narrative anyway? So here you have 3 keywords from the field of storytelling: data, story, and narrative. What is the relationship between these keywords? And here on the right top, you have the famous tale, Red Riding Hood. Okay, so what is the data in this tale? Well, the data is all the details in the story. And what is the role of the data? Well, the role of the data is to lend credibility to your story. And what is the story? Well, you know the story of the video. And what is the narrative? The narrative is the purpose of the story, the reason why we tell that story. What is the narrative then, or the purpose of this tale? Well, it is that young children, especially young girls, should not trust strangers, right? That we cannot go to a 5-year-old and say, hey, do not trust the strangers. He will not understand or maybe remember. The way to do that is through a tale. And if you look at all the countries in Europe, they all have this tale or a version of it. This thing, it also works with adults. Here you have a very interesting visual from 2 years ago. And here's the third quiz of today. Can you identify the data, the story, and the narrative in this visual?
So I think the question in the poll is actually, which one is the narrative?
Which one is the narrative?
It takes me back being in the UK. That was one disaster ago, mate. That was it's not our current disaster. That was the previous disaster.
It's a very complex topic. Not even data visualization, we can understand it well.
No. you're bordering on lies with this one.
Right.
We're up to 23, so give it a minute or so more.
So yeah, we can talk about the weather again. So I got stuck in Stockholm, and I had planned a trip for a weekend because I was supposed to give a weekend workshop, a lecture. And then I got stuck for like 1 month already, and I had to buy clothes all over again. Traumatic.
I think your wardrobe from UAE wouldn't have suited Sweden that well.
Anyway, yeah.
Okay, we got most of the answers, mate. So,
Rude. So, what is the narrative here? So, the narrative is let's take back control. In other words, people from outside are taking advantage of us. Right? And what is the data? Well, what lends credibility to this advertisement? 350 million, right? Which turned out it was not exactly correct. What's the story? We send money outside of the UK, right? And so let's fund our stuff. And there's also the call to action, which is vote with, right? So that was a very, very effective advertisement, even though later it was found out that it was a bit of a lie, but it really worked because there was a very effective use of narrative. It's all subjective. Absolutely, John Grant is absolutely subjective. Yes. You couldn't. Don't worry, Megan. Don't worry. Right. So here you have it. Rule number 6. Choose a chart that is compatible with your narrative, your purpose. In other words, choose a chart that doesn't undermine what you want to say. And this happens so often, and we will see some examples now. So let's imagine that you have this table. This is the global breakdown of data scientists by gender. So if you ask people to visualize this, they will come up usually with this histogram. And let me ask you one question now. Is this histogram data, information, or knowledge? Well, to me, this chart has the same information as the table. So if the table is data, this chart is no better than the table. If we ask people to visualize this, some students usually come up with a pie chart. Others come up with a bar chart that you saw. This would be only 2 genders, right? But what is the problem with a pie chart? What is the subjective or hidden narrative in a pie? What is a pie? The pie is a metaphor for a real pie. Right? And what happens when you have a pie and 10 kids around the pie? Well, there's going to be a fight, right? So, for example, if your narrative is advocating for gender equality and use a pie chart to display gender breakdown, subliminally, what are you saying? It doesn't help you a lot. What about the bar chart? The bar chart leads to a narrative of competition. Who is higher? Is this what you want to convey in a gender equality narrative? So a more neutral chart would be a horizontal chart, like the stack bar. The problem with the stack bar is quite boring, actually. So how do we make it that people will remember us? Well, one thing you can do is to use personas, right? So in this case, we use superheroes, and we represent the proportional amount of men and women choosing a superhero, Batman and Wonder Woman, right? And remember, if nobody remembers your chart, it didn't exist. So whenever you can, do something so they will remember. And here comes quiz number 4. So imagine that you have taken a data visualization course, and your boss loves you for your visualizations because you're so witty, and he asks you to make a chart that visualizes the gender distribution in your company and also shows a goal of 50% parity. So what kind of chart would you do? I think this quiz was a bit easy. What do you think?
They're all coming in now. Quite a high proportion, looking good. What's that, 25?
Amy, I feel your pain. I feel your pain. Maurice Griffin. Good. Sunil. This is where data science becomes absolutely, and it overlaps a lot with advertisement. So it is great if you read some advertisement books. It really helps you, because when you do a chart, what do you do actually is you want to convince people of something. So a good chart is also a good ad.
Yeah, I'm playing around with that at the moment. You know, explaining the business in a more compelling way, with a more compelling story about the data. Okay, mate. Yes. So I think that's probably most people done now.
Excellent. So let's see some possible results. So when we ask students to visualize this, they usually will use a pie chart, and they will use an arrow to say, hey, this is the goal, right? You can use arrows to visualize goals. So that would be an example. What is the problem here? Is the force of gravity is the problem here. Like this arrow, which points to the goal you want, is going downwards, right? So subliminally, what are you saying? It's like, oh, it's not a very high goal. Is that what you're saying? Right? So it kind of undermines your narrative. What about this one? This is a stack bar, and the arrow is going up, right? And it's fighting against gravity, which can also be good or bad, depending what you want to say. But if it's fighting against gravity, what does it mean? It means it's a very hard to achieve goal, right? So you have to be careful with the force of gravity, right? So here you have a more neutral chart. So the take home here is be mindful of the direction of gravity in your chart. Right. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples now of famous people that did charts and that they could have improved a lot with a bit of awareness. Do you know who is this guy? So this is Elon Musk. A few years ago, he did a presentation where he was promoting the use of solar panels. He wanted to encourage use of solar panels. And he showed this chart and he said, we just need 1 pixel of the USA covered in solar panels to fulfill all the US electricity demand. What is the problem here? Well, first, nobody could see the pixel. So can you trust something that you cannot see? And second, what is the narrative here? We need to use some land. Which land is it going to be? Is it going to be your land, his land? Who's going to pay for it? It leads to a scarcity narrative, like same purpose, different company. This was a chart used by Q-Cells. Q-Cells was a German solar panel manufacturer. And the narrative here, instead of win-lose, it's win-win. This chart shows the amount of renewable energy available every year that hits the earth. And it's saying look at how much solar energy we have every year compared to the other sources. There's so much of it. There's such an abundance. It's a win-win narrative, much more positive. So same purpose, but different narrative, different chart narrative, different results. Here you have another famous example. A few years ago, Al Gore, this guy here is Al Gore, he did a presentation. Here the y-axis is, red line is CO2 concentration, and this is temperature. And this is 600,000 years of history. And he wanted to show that, hey, the CO2 concentration is off the charts. This is really a problem. So they put Al Gore on a lift, to show that it's off the charts. This presentation has 62,000 views on YouTube, but it cost a lot of money to make. A few years later, a professor from the UK, Edward Hawkins, he took less data and he made a spiral chart and he posted it on Twitter, and it went viral in minutes. And then a few years later, my favorite Swedish person, Greta Thunberg, she ignores all the charts and tells us a story. And what story is she telling us? She's saying, hey, I have to go to this climate conference, but I'm advocating for CO2 emission reductions. And I am not going to use a flight to go there because I have integrity, right? And look at these big waves behind me. This is dangerous. This is an emergency. And you have three examples of three people that wanted to say the same, but they say it in a different way, and they had a different impact in the world. Right. So let's summarize here. Tell me a story. Data isn't knowledge or information. Use frameworks to create knowledge and make it memorable. And the story purpose is the narrative, and choose a chart that is compatible. So these are the 6 rules for data visualization. All right, and I think now we can have a little break. We have more slides, and I want to ask, how are you guys feeling? Do you want to continue 20 more minutes? You can let us know in the chat while I chat to Andy.
That's great. I think we'd allocated an hour and a half for this, so we should be okay to go on. Hopefully people are still feeling up for it, so we can carry on. I'm hoping all right. Sure, yeah.
Yes, please. Okay, good. Awesome. Great. So we're going to have 2-minute breaks because I need to drink some water, yeah?
You get some
and
water.
You guys probably too.
Yeah.
Super. Excellent, Hervé. See you soon. Okay, we're back. Is everybody back?
Yeah.
Right. So we have seen how to make a chart that is useful and memorable and that people will remember. In this second part of this presentation, I want to show you the really, really valuable thing, which is how to use charts to augment your IQ. Right, Catherine Orton, welcome. So let's go with it. So there is this thing called IQ that everybody knows, and maybe you're not so familiar with the 7-chunk memory limit. So there's this theory that says that humans cannot remember more than 7 pieces of information at the same time. And that is what limits our IQ, basically. And this is the reason why the rainbow has 7 colors in most cultures. And it's the reason why 7 is the magic number. And it's the reason why a good presentation should not have more than 7 ideas or 7, etc. This is it, yeah. So a normal human, which has an IQ of 100, so it's limited by basically this 7-chunk memory limit, the working memory, what we call. When we give a human or a monkey, doesn't matter, a pen, then suddenly he can expand his memory more. But if we give him the right chart, then he can be really, really, really smart. And this is what the second part is about. And so I'm going to give you a few examples. And again, I went to research what had been done in charts to think. And I found the earliest example. This is a painting of a cave in Spain. And it depicts some hunting strategies. Something similar to what we're doing here, right? And I'm sure they use these paintings to describe, tomorrow we're gonna hunt and you're gonna go here and you're gonna go here. So this is a way to expand your memory limit. And if we look at the history of charts, we can see not a lot of innovation, actually. Like, for example, pie charts were invented 219 years ago, quite a long time. And then histograms were invented almost 100 years later. And then you have the Wheel of Life, which is a chart that you will find on the book, but it's typically used by life coaches to plot the satisfaction in different life dimensions. This chart was invented only 70 years ago. And there's another chart used by Toyota, popularized in the 70s. It's called the A3 PDCA reporting. Andrew, do you use this chart in your
yes, yeah, certainly PDCA, PDSA, A3, yeah.
So some of you know that I did my PhD in Japan, and some of my colleagues of the university, they work at Toyota and Toyota affiliates, and they tell me that in the meetings, they don't have reports. They have an A3 PDCA paper, and they have to describe the problem in one paper, and that's it. And that limiting of the information helps them focus on what's important and what's not. 2 years later, Boston Consulting Group came up with the shared growth matrix. And 2000, Hans Rosling, who used to work at Karolinska Institute, came up with these Gapminder visualizations and his famous TED Talk. 3 years later, the Swiss person, Alex Osterwalder, invented the business canvas, which is now taught in all the business schools. 2010, Gartner's Magic Quadrant of Technology was invented. And 2011, the first Worldly Map appeared. And we can say now that Worldly Maps is the most important visual innovation or strategy thinking tool innovation in the last, I would say, since the business canvas.
Fingers crossed we got Simon Wardley going to do a webinar on that, mate.
I'm going to join it because he's a genius.
He is. He's amazing.
So here you have like a dozen of charts, and some of them, they're more descriptive in nature, and some of them, big ones, they help you think more. And those are the ones we're interested in this part of the presentation. Here's the same information in a more visual way. Right, so I'm gonna run through some examples of charts that make you smarter. And so as we saw, this is the business model canvas, which I'm not going to explain, but I want to tell you something important about the business model canvas. If you don't think that the business model canvas is amazing, it means that nobody taught it to you well. And I see this in many classes. I go to a class and I tell the students, today I'm going to teach you the business model canvas, and all the students go like, oh, not again the business model canvas. And what I do is, I know, just do it. Just did the business model canvas, and we pick a Spanish company called Inditex, owner of Zara. And they say, okay, we'll do the business canvas of Zara. And they do the business canvas, and then I say, okay, very fine. So we put it on the wall. And then I show them a documentary, a very obscure, but very amazing documentary on Zara. And then I say, do the business canvas again. And then they completely change the business canvas, completely different. And what's the difference? Is that after the documentary, they really understand Zara as a company, and they can make a truthful business canvas that is useful. And that is the problem with the business canvas. You need good information to do a useful tool. And if you don't have this good information, then it doesn't matter what chart or tool you use. And this goes for all the charts we're going to see today.
Funnily enough, mate, I've not a meter and a half from me, I've got the business model canvas, the value proposition canvas. They're up on the wall, and they're what I'm using to redesign the business during the crisis, and to really go into what do we need to do, how do we need to respond to support our customers, what channels, because everything's up in the air, isn't it, as everyone knows. So it's such a powerful tool.
Yes, and it's really powerful if you use Post-its, because, for example, the difference between IKEA and a furniture shop is moving the cost structure, which is assembling the furniture from the company to the customer, right? So it's really amazing how you can use it to innovate. Yeah. Dealing with complexity is a thing you will face. This is an example of a multidimensional data set, for example. It's very complex. And one trick we use to deal with complex data is to project our data in a 2D space, which is a way of simplifying, is a way to transform data into information. This is done all over the place. If you look at the Gartner Magic Quadrant, this is what they do with companies. Companies are really complex and it's very multidimensional, but they simplify and they say, okay, we're gonna place companies in 2 axes, and that's it. And then they cluster in 4 quadrants, and that gives an illusion of order and knowledge. But the trick is this one, to project into and this is done all over again. So this is a very interesting trick when you have complex data. The next thing I want to mention is, we mentioned earlier that to create knowledge, you need to connect to existing bodies of frameworks, bodies of knowledges, or thinking frameworks to connect. So I'm going to show you a very simple example of how to do that. So here we have a chart. This chart is the number of data scientists per country. And here you have all the countries in the world. This data is from the 2018 Kaggle survey. Kaggle is a data science community owned by Google. So the question here is this chart data, information, or knowledge? And the answer is, this chart is a disaster. They have information overload. There's too many countries to make sense. There's more than 7 concepts here in this chart, so no human is going to understand this chart. So how do we transform this chart into knowledge? So as we said, one way to do that is to use the BRICS thinking framework. And the BRICS framework is a framework from economics. BRICS means Brazil, Russia, India, China. It's a group of countries that were grouped together because they had similar growth rates and similar social status. And so if we use the BRICS framework to reduce the complexity of having so many countries, and we group the countries in 4 groups, US, Europe, the BRICS, and the rest of the world. And instead of looking at this year's data science numbers, we look at the change in data scientists, we have a much more interesting chart. We have, in effect, transformed this data into actually useful information. In other words, knowledge. And why is this interesting? Well, so let's take a look. So in here, we have like the top countries were US and India, right? But here we have the countries that are growing the most is the BRICS countries. Like 42% of the new data scientists next year will come from BRICS. So that's much more valuable information than what we had before. And we accomplished that by connecting to thinking frameworks. And why is this valuable? Because imagine if you are Google and you want to advertise to data scientists or to invest in community projects like Kaggle, right? Should you focus on US or Europe? Or should you focus on the BRICS countries, knowing that in 10 years, 70% of the data scientists will be from these countries? So that's a bit more useful than the previous chart, right? So that's knowledge. And connecting is the thing. Another example, same data, and we use the framework called prevalence. This prevalence means basically density. It's used in sociology and anthropology, and it's basically you can describe a country by the number of doctors per 10,000 population. It's very useful to indicate the development of a country. In this case, instead of having this, we decided to look at the density of data scientists, not the raw absolute number. And when you do that, and this is the x-axis, this is the number of data scientists per 10,000 people, and then we rank the countries, what do we have? We have that if you want to marry a data scientist, you should go to Singapore because you will find you have the most chances, right? So that's a completely different story and much more useful, and say, oh my God, wow, okay, that's interesting. Same chart, and now we are going to connect to another thinking framework called the ranking of innovation. So every year, 2 organizations publish the Global Innovation Index. And yes, death by data, but bear with me, last chart. They publish the Global Innovation Index, and on the x-axis, we have the density of data scientists. And here you can see all the countries, right? So that shows, oh, wow. So Japan is very high in innovation, but very low on density. And Singapore is an outlier, and the USA is here. That's quite interesting. You can also apply the thinking framework. There's a principle called mean reversion, which means that in the long run, if there is a phenomena, everything reverts to the mean. And this principle is universal. It means that there is no lasting competitive advantages. So if you apply this, you can now predict where the countries are going to move in the long run in this map, right? So for example, in this case, we could predict that Japan, because the mean reversion will come down in innovation and will grow up in Kaggle survey and density of data scientists. So these are 4 examples of how to connect the initial data we got into 4 different frameworks and transforming data into interesting knowledge. And the last example, the COVID-19 charts. So if you look at the COVID-19 charts, at the beginning, the newspapers were plotting the raw number of deaths and the day, right? And it was not really useful. And then somebody came up with the idea of resetting all the countries' timelines to the first case or the first death or the 100th case. And when you do that, all the countries start looking the same and you can compare them very easily. And that's why this chart, where the x-axis is not the real time, is the days since the 100th confirmed case, became the most popular chart to compare countries and say, hey, which country is doing something that is good, it's a good policy or a bad policy. So this is another example of a chart. I don't like this chart because if you think about the gravity force, it looks like the higher the country is, the better. But actually, this is death. So the higher countries are not the best performers, actually, it's the worst performers. So if I had done this chart, I would have, this is the Financial Times chart. If I had done this chart, I would have totally flip it and say, hey, deaths should go down. And then it's much easier to understand which countries are doing great. For example, Finland and Sweden are doing way better than other countries, right? So, and this is all I wanted to explain today. Andy?
That's brilliant, mate. Thank you very much. So I think there are some references. Do download the handouts. If you wanted them afterwards, you can always email and get in touch and we'll happily share them. We will do the prize winners afterwards. So we need to have a look at who's answered the questions right. Please do have a look at Jose's book. It is definitely well worth it. There is another book you've done as well on sketchnoting, and we might even, if people are quite interested, we might even get a session on sketchnoting for design. Is it? I'll just pop that link up for people now. Sketch for design.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to send that through to you. If you have pop-ups on, that might not pop up for you. So has anyone got any questions for Jose that they would like to take? I'm just seeing in the Q&A, there is one from Sunil. Send us a link for Simon Wardley's session. Yeah, absolutely. With all the webinars, we send out the new ones to the people that have attended, and obviously you can unsubscribe if you don't want them. But yes, we will send that out. So in there. Should we all learn to use visualization grammars like Vega, or should we stick with the visualization tools we already know?
That's a very good question, John Grant. So one of the co-authors of the book, it's Maribeth Sandel, who used to be the bureau chief of Bloomberg, London, for many years. And so I asked her, what tools do you use to visualize? And she told me, first, there's always a team visualizing. It's me, it's a journalist, and it's the graphic designer. And second, we don't use Excel because it takes too long to tweak the chart to get the colors and the thickness of lines that you want. So at the end, we always use Illustrator to do our charts. So don't be ashamed to use PowerPoint to do your charts. In fact, I have used PowerPoints in many of my presentations and papers to do the charts, and it's faster. You can do the chart in Excel to see the proper chart, and then at the end, it's really faster to use a graphic design software because Excel was not designed with graphic design in mind.
No, and I think that's probably a key takeaway for me from today is it's about the message rather than the tool set that you're using necessarily, because, you know, everything's got its pluses and its minuses, hasn't it? We all know that. That's software. So anyone for anything else? I'm not sure. Thomas, is that a question concerning the Corona chart following Hofstadter?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Wonderful.
Okay. Oh, thanks, Dad. I'm sure you were well up for data visualization. You've taught my dad something today, Jose. So that's
thank you.
Good. He'll be able to visualize his golf scores much better when he's allowed to play again.
Wonderful. Okay, I'll see you all soon. Bye.
Brilliant. So thank you. And we'll keep in touch with future webinars. We're not seeing any questions. So massive thanks, Jose. That's been really good. URL for data visualization book. Yeah, no problem. It's there is a link here. You can use that bit.ly link. And that's in the slides, so please do help yourself to that. It's in the handouts as well, and you'll be able to see it on the replay once this is done. Thank you, Jose.
Absolutely. Andrew, big hug to you and stay safe there in Turkey.
Yes, you too, mate, and I hope you get somewhere nearer home soon.
Inshallah. Inshallah.
Yes. Goodbye, mate. Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Ciao, ciao.